Welcome back. This is part 3 of our Chapter 7, List and Tuples. Now, I will tell you that you want to buckle in for this part because it may be a little bit complicated. We're going to talk about list comprehensions. Now, a list comprehension is a concise expression that allows us to make a new list by iterating over the elements of an existing list. And you're probably going, but Professor Waits, we already know how to do that. We've already seen that. We've already gone ahead and we've iterated over the elements of an existing list. And in doing so, we've created a new list. And yes, you're right. But in this, we're actually going to see a much more concise expression on how to do that. So let's take this following set of code. You've seen this kind of code where we have two lists. I'll do a little bit of drawing here. We've got list 1 and we've got list 2. And then we go ahead and make use of a for list that iterates through list 1. And then as we go through that, it appends items to our list 2. Okay, great. We can do this in a much more simple and much more concise set of code. Now, again, strap in. Here we go. So we have our list, list 1. Then we have this next statement that says item, for item in list 1. And let's break that down a little bit. We have our for loop here. And then we have this target item. So with that being said, the item here in this for item in list 1 goes to this expression, item, and then this we can manipulate as well, but whatever's here is going to then get stored into our new list. Let's say that again. So here is our for expression. As we know, this item becomes the target of our iteration, which then comes out of this and is stored into this target. And then we can actually do additional items here, but whatever is eventually stored here then gets put into our new list. Let's see this a little bit more clearly in action. So here's our list, 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's go back and recognize that with this for item in list 1 goes into this item, which then goes into list 2. So this essentially it makes a copy of what's in list 1. It puts it into list 2. But let's see that a little bit more in action. So we have this for item in list 1. And remember, list 1 refers back to this list. As we iterate through, that item then gets stored, whatever is coming out of this for loop will get stored into this variable. And then we can manipulate that. And in this case, we're squaring each item that comes into this item. We're going to square it. And then that gets saved into our new list. So that's why 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9, and 4 squared is 16. That's why our new list contains 1, 4, 9, and 16. Real quick, just for the sake of making sure everyone's on the same page, remember, this is our iteration. We're going to pull everything from list 1. It's going to go first into this item, and then into this item. And then we can do things to this item, and that whatever happens here gets stored into our list. Again, because we can do things with it, remember that this is our for loop, and they throw us a little bit of a curveball. Instead of using the word item, they are just simply using the variable s. And again, we can then make use of that s out here, and as they are, but we can manipulate s. And that's what they have done here by using this length. So that's why when this executes, it's going to give us the length of each string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7, and that's 3 length. So again, our iteration, this is our for loop, which is going to store each item one by one into our s. And then our s is going to come over here, and this is where we can manipulate s. And that's what we're doing. We're getting the length of s. And whatever comes out of this is what's going to get stored into our list. Now let's add a little more to it. We can actually do an if clause in our comprehension. So let's take this set of code. Here is our list 1 and list 2, so our current list and our new list. And then we're going to sit in a for loop. Here's our for loop. And then we're going to essentially do an if statement. Now, because we're doing this in code, at this point, we now have to append. When we do it as a comprehension expression, we don't need to use the append. That's already a given. So with that being said, here is our list 1, then our list 2, but in this, we first do our iteration, our for loop. So here it is, for item in list 1. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to take this item, and it's going to, sorry about that. Let's go ahead and clear the screen and start over again. So as I was saying, we have our for list. In this, item is going to come over here and now be a part of this. The if statement is now going to be evaluated. And if it meets the requirements, if the true comes back from this if statement, then item will now be, this item, sorry, will now be pushed back over here into this, if it's true. And remember, when we're already here at this location, this item, while we're here, we can, if we want to, then do additional stuff. Like this is where we could do the square, or we can add it to something, so forth and so on. But whatever is then stored, whatever comes out of this area, is then added to our list. And it's important to understand is that as we iterate through our list, here's our list, and the item is then brought over here. If this comes out as false, that's where it stops. It then goes to the next item in the list. If it's true, then it comes back and it stores it in this item. But again, if it's false, it stops and goes on to the next item in the iteration. So for this item, this for item in list 1, if the item is less than 10, then you're going to put it over into this item, and we're not going to do anything else more to it. So that means it will make it into our new list. And as it iterates, 1, 2, 3, and 4 will make it into our new list. Now you may want to go back and watch that portion of the video again if you're struggling with it. I will tell you that it'll make more sense when you start getting into your code and just playing with it. Play with that comprehension piece. It will make more sense as you play with it and just get used to it. Now we can talk about two-dimensional lists. We work with two-dimensional lists all the time, and it's a list of lists. It's also known as a nested list. And when we think of two-dimensional lists, think of them as kind of having rows and columns. And it's definitely useful for working with multiple sets of data. Now, to process data in a two-dimensional list, we need to use two indexes. And we're going to show you that here in a moment. Typically, to process a nested loop, we're going to have to use to process nested lists, we typically use nested loops. So what does a two-dimensional list look like? Well, first kind of imagine that this is just our list. It's what we've known so far, and we will just kind of blank this out. Let's see if I can do that here. Right, ignore that. And we have a row that is Joe and Kim. We've been doing this all along. Well, what if instead of a string, Joe and Kim, what if index 0, and remember, this is index 0, and this is index 1. What if instead of putting a string in, we put another list? And that's what's happening here. We have, when we go to create our list, we're making and saying our index 0 of our list is going to be a list. And here it is. And same thing with now index position 1 is another list. Let's look at a little bit more of a robust two-dimensional list. And here, we actually show the indexing position. The first index is always the row, and the second index is the column. So as you can see, this is index 0, 0 because it's row 0, column 0. This is 0, 1 because it's row 0, column 1, and so forth. Row 0, column 2. Now when we move to the next row, we have to change the row index, which is the first one. So now all these are going to have the first index is 1. And then our columns are going to go 0, 1, and 2, so forth and so on. Row 2, scores. We've got 2 in the row index, 0, 1, and 2 in the column index. We're going to wrap up this chapter with tuples. Now, tuples is just like a list. The biggest difference, really one of the main differences, is that a tuple is an immutable sequence. And it's very similar, like I said, to a list. Once it's created, though, it cannot be changed. So when we create our tuple, we're also going to go ahead and give it its items. With that, we know that a tuple can support certain operations, like we can use indexes, We can use functions like the len, which is length, min, and max. We can slice a tuple, because while slicing pulls data out of that list, it doesn't change the list. It pulls the data out and gives it to you into a new list. The in, plus, and star operators will also work on a tuple. However, you cannot append, remove, insert, reverse, or sort a tuple. Again, because it's immutable, you can't change the actual list. Or you can't change the tuple. So why even have a tuple? Well, one of the biggest advantages is that tuples actually process a lot faster than a list. The other thing is that tuples are safe. And because tuples are safe, some Python operations require tuples. That way they know that they can't accidentally change your tuple. This is a pillar when it comes to good coding. Whenever possible, always use items that are immutable, because you want to make sure that your code doesn't accidentally change it somewhere and somehow. That's where bugs usually kind of creep into our code, is where we have something that should not be changed, and somewhere down in our code path, it does get changed. Well, tuples stop that. Tuples make to where once it's created, you can use it all day long. You just can't change it. Now, if we have a tuple and we want to go back to a list, we would use the list function. And if we have a list and we want to convert it to a tuple, we'd use the tuple function. So in this chapter, we've covered everything about lists. And remember, a list is a sequence. It's repetition and concatenating operators. We've talked about index. We know how to process lists. We can definitely slice and copy lists. And we've talked about a list of, a set of methods we can use on our list. And we also talked about what a two-dimensional list is. We summarized and finished up, we finished up the chapter with tuples and how that they're immutable. And we talked about the advantages over lists. This is chapter 7, and I hope you all enjoyed it. We will have some videos that also cover some of the homework examples. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.